Well, obviously, thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you coming out tonight. I am really, really glad to be back in my hometown of Yakima. It's really people like you and communities all across our nation that really are the backbone of our country. And you are really what makes our country healthy and strong. And I really want to thank Rob for inviting me here for this life-changing, at least it is for me, life-changing announcement. So after 20 years of doing initiatives, I think a lot of people think that they know something about me. And the reality is most of what you know about me has never actually come from me. It's come from other people. And so I figured that maybe before people end up actually voting for me, they ought to hear from their next governor in his own mouth, in his own voice, about what I want to do. I was born and raised right here in Yakima, 71st and Tieton. During the first 18 years of my life, I had a great family, great friends, great teachers, and great mentors. I was surrounded by and inspired by amazing people with an extraordinary work ethic. It was and is an incredibly great place to grow up. I went to Wide Hollow Elementary. I then became a West Valley Panther, and then I became a West Valley Ram. And I'm joined by a lot of friends and family today. Heck, I come from such a big extended family that I think if I can get all the Eymans, Klingels, Erlockers, Emards, and all the other Modrells in all of Yakima, that I'm going to carry this county if I could just get them to vote for me. My dad, Don Eyman, was a very soft-spoken man. And he did many, many things. But I think that what he was proudest of was for 25 years he served as the president of the West Valley School Board. And he really taught me the importance of public service. My mom, Dolores Eyman, was the Energizer Bunny. She was the talker. She was one of these women that could do absolutely anything, and she always did. And she taught me about hard work. And they're the ones who raised me and instilled in me Yakima's conservative values. That part of me is a result of that kind of nurture that I had. But it turns out that nature also ended up playing an extraordinary role in my life. As many of you know, my family has an odd, strange, beautiful tradition of adoption. My dad was adopted, I was adopted, and my 3 kids are adopted. And my mom and dad always told me that it was cool to be adopted. And they always encouraged me to try and, at some point, locate my birth parents and connect with them. And when I was in my mid-20s, that's exactly what I did, and I found both of them. And what do you know? Both of my birth parents ended up getting political science degrees from universities. So politics is literally in my blood. Now, in a sign that God has an incredibly good sense of humor, both of my birth parents are very liberal. So nature has set me on a path toward politics, but I was nurtured with Yakima's conservative values. So it should really come as no surprise that I have come here today to formally declare my candidacy for governor. Yeah. And I'm also here to announce a very other big decision and the big announcement that this is about. But I wanted to do it right here in Yakima with all of you. Last fall, we won a huge victory for the voters as we passed Initiative 976 on $30 tabs and that law once and for all. And for 11 months, I really got the crap kicked out of me by the other side. For an entire year, you ended up having close to $5 million being spent saying vote no on Tim Eyman's $30 tabs initiative. It said don't vote yes on that measure. The media totally against the ballot measure. They had every advantage they could possibly have, but at the end of the day, the voters ended up voting overwhelmingly for this measure for the third time. It was an amazing victory. I still remember on election night, I was able to share that moment with my 11-year-old daughter, and I literally can't imagine a greater experience than to share that love I have with politics with Riley. But even so, even after such a tremendous election, it was clear that the fight continued. Within a couple of weeks, it really crystallized in my mind that we've really been letting voters cheat over the last 2 decades. You see, as everyone knows in this room, the voters consistently vote for initiatives that reduce taxes. Yet they continue to send tax-happy politicians like Jay Inslee to Olympia and the governor's mansion. The voters have settled, for electing fakers and fibbers for decades just because they have a D next to their name. Well, there's no more cheating now, because I decided, since the Democrats and the media always try to make the initiatives about me and basically put me on the ballot, I felt it was time to just simply make it official. And so I'm running for governor, and I'm running to win. And I truly believe that with your help, we can break the Democrats' stranglehold on the governor's office once and for all. With politics in my blood, I've always been willing to mix it up when it comes to issues. And you've seen me do some pretty goofy things over the years in Olympia, like once dressing up in a gorilla costume. But here's the reality. Voters want more choices, which is the longtime slogan that I've had, was always a dead serious issue in order to help the state's taxpayers actually survive our state. And too often in Olympia, politicians never solve problems. But the people want solutions to issues that they care about. And even though voters have agreed with me most of the time, I've never been elected to anything. So what makes me qualified to be your governor? From my more than 20-year career as an initiative activist and a policy reformer, I gained an honorary PhD in the real world of politics. I learned to identify ways to be able to reduce taxes and get people excited about actually solving these problems. The initiatives that I've sponsored, that you all funded, that you all helped fight for and support and vote for, have saved the taxpayers of the state of Washington over the last 20 years $43 billion. Every issue that I have proposed had nothing to do with party, no matter how much the media or the Democrats ended up trying to make it that. I always ask the voters to consider these issues on the merits and not to divide ourselves by party. And having that mindset and not considering sanity to actually be a partisan issue, I said I'd be an independent running for governor when I first announced. But in the last 6 weeks, I have heard from so many friends, so many supporters, so many people that have supported me and the initiatives we've done over the years, and almost all of them said the same thing. We want you to run as a Republican. We want you to announce that you're going to run as a Republican. Now, since, after all, next to just family, what is more important than your friends? And I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think it feels right for me. So today, right now, I want to formally, enthusiastically, and proudly announce that I am running for governor as a Republican. Now, while I've always been my own man, I've never been alone. You, the grassroots Republicans of the state of Washington, have always had my back. And I also think the Republican Party is actually better today than it's ever been. And that is really saying a lot, because ours is the party of women's suffrage. Our party ended slavery, ended Jim Crow, passed the Civil Rights Act, and numerous other social and political accomplishments. Yet for all the Democrats' talk on these matters, the Republican Party's commitment to equal opportunity is rock solid. The other party, not so much. Because what happened was, this last November, we have Jay Inslee and the Democrat Party, the supposed party of inclusion, think that there are too many Asians on college campuses. Too many Asians on college campuses. They actually were in favor of a measure that would say we need to decrease the number of Asians qualifying for our universities simply because of their skin color, simply because of their race. And it is simply obscene that they ended up doing that. The voters rejected that, but that is the value system that we're dealing with there. And fortunately, there were leaders in the Asian community, Con Q and Linda Yang, and other heroes in the Asian community that allowed us, the voters, to be able to vote on the same measure that the voters had approved 20 years ago, saying we want the government to simply treat everyone equally, and you shouldn't get extra points or negative points based on what group you belong to. Jay Inslee, unfortunately, is actually ignoring that vote and seeking to implement those policies despite the fact that the voters ended up voting for that now twice. And as governor, I will make sure that state and local governments and public universities and public schools and all of our public schools do not have different rules for different races. I really thought the days of Jim Crow were over, but not to Jay Inslee and the Democrats down in Olympia. And by the way, what does this have to do with $30 tabs? Not a thing. The reality is, as a candidate for office, I get to talk about anything. I get to talk about all sorts of issues, not just $30 tabs. And one of the things that I am so proud of is that the first initiative that I ever sponsored in the state of Washington said that we need to roll back affirmative action and make sure that the government treats all of us equally and not to have different rules for different races. And there we go. That was 20 years ago, and the voters overwhelmingly voted for that initiative, and we have a governor now that's seeking to overturn that despite the fact that the voters have voted for it multiple times. I was so incredibly pleased when the voters voted for that, and I am absolutely committed to upholding that voter decision. The Republican Party's legacy shines from having to clean up so many messes that the Democrats have created. With what's happened during the last 8 years, and if you see some of the crazy town stuff that you've got down in Olympia right now, we've really got our work cut out for us. However, too many voters either don't know or have forgotten that Republican legacy. And in 2020, we're going to fix that. We're going to communicate our ideas like never before so we can bring in droves of new people to share in this legacy. I am proud to represent the party of free enterprise, low taxes, small business, and even smaller government. The party of equal opportunity and fair elections. That's right, fair elections. The ones that aren't overturned by political judges and rogue politicians. Most of all, I am proud to represent a party that defends free speech, the Second Amendment, and individual liberty, that defends faith, that defends human life, and the party which stands in stark contrast to the Democrats in support of our federal as well as our state constitution. The Republican Party today matches my values, my beliefs, and what I stand for more than ever before. So I'm honored to take our message to the voters this year to show them what we stand for and how our ideas are better than their ideas. with the hot mess that Inslee and the Seattle Democrats are making of our state, I do not believe that 4 years is going to quite do it. But I believe that it is not just Republicans. We are talking about independents and Democrats. They are begging for an emergency crew that will listen to them and clean up these many messes. I really believe that we are in the middle of an incredible paradigm shift in this country. I've watched this change develop over my career in public policy, and it really culminated with President Trump's election. On one side, you have one party that really loves this country, and they realize that it is not the government that makes America great. It's the people of this country with their values, their faith, their industriousness, their generosity, and their creativity. And the other side, though, you seem to have people who find books by Karl Marx more impressive than our Constitution. They want to re-engineer our society, rewrite our history, and divide us by skin color, by gender, and by income. They want to put the tax man in your wallet and a bureaucrat on your front lawn, and make your God-given individual liberty something doled out at their discretion. Every year, Seattle and Olympia proposes some loony experiment. And I do not want to experiment with our communities, our schools, our businesses, or our roads. Because there's one formula that has always worked and always will, and that is to keep taxes low and keep regulations to an absolute minimum. Now, I tend to chuckle every time people make comparisons between me running for governor and President Trump being our president. And I've come to take that pretty seriously now, because we have to ask the question, why is Donald Trump our president? Because he, sounds good to me, because he heard from people what the political class didn't. Because he was willing to do and say things that other candidates weren't. He saw where the voters were and where business as usual was taking us, and was able to build a bond that the people had with him. Now, being a billionaire and a household name probably didn't hurt, but I think that that's not why he won. You may hear other candidates in this race that want to distance themselves from our president. And I get that. We talk to each other a certain way here in the Northwest. And just because Trump is a brusque New Yorker who may speak a little differently than some Washingtonians are used to, that's no good reason for me to distance myself from the biggest boom economy in America's modern history. There is no way I'm going to run away from tax reforms and trade deals that are making our country thrive, or from criminal justice reforms that make everyone get treated equally. And don't you just love how mad the left gets at all of his success? It makes them so crazy to find out that our approach works if we just give it a chance. I've been amazed at how dirty the other side is actually willing to be. And this is an area where people do make a certain comparison between me and Trump. Because the reality is, if you beat them, they will make it personal and they will get nasty. They want to take down your team. They want to sue you, tie you up in court, and accuse you of breaking the law. They broke every rule in the book trying to impeach the president and throw him out of office. And if President Trump would have just called me after he won the election, I could have told him what to expect. Because for more than 20 years, that's exactly what's been happening to me. I've been proposing issues that the voters really care about that actually help our state. Issues that the voters agree with me on. And most of the time, we really nailed it. And the Democrats always hated it. To the left, I am the most hated man in Washington State. So they are trying to ban me and prohibit me from being politically active for the rest of my life. Bob Ferguson has a lawsuit against me where the stated purpose is to make sure that Tim Eyman is not allowed to be political in the state of Washington for the rest of my life. This is crazy land stuff, to strip me of my basic First Amendment rights. So naturally, I have doubled down. And I may just be signing and most certainly vetoing bills in January.
Yeah, there you go.
So if you elect me governor, what will I do? First of all, while the damage done by 40 years of one-party rule will take more than 4 years to fix, as governor, I would put a stop to it right away. For instance, it's absolutely time to put an end to the homeless industrial complex. The surge of people suffering on our streets under Inslee's watch is absolutely shameful. If it were just the homeless, that would be bad enough. His party's policies increasing homelessness are also destroying families and fueling an addiction epidemic. The cost to our communities is simply unbearable, and the human cost is incalculable. Even worse, the forgotten victims of these poverty-spreading policies are the residents, workers, and small business owners in communities throughout this state. These people are forced to encounter dangerous, unsanitary, and unsafe conditions on a daily basis. And Inslee says that you all need to pay higher taxes for it, just for the privilege. By Seattle hamstringing law enforcement and encouraging drug abuse, they not only grow the crisis, but they also export it to other parts of the state. Seattle leftists say housing costs are the cause of the problem. And what's their solution? They're pushing taxes on jobs, on our largest employers. They're pushing failed 20th century rent control ideas. Then they blow taxpayer money in order to be able to help the homeless on parties with transgender strippers. It's in the newspapers. Crazy. Meanwhile, in Olympia, Inslee has allowed the state mental hospital to fail. The result of that is Seattle's homeless and drug addiction epidemics are making national headlines and spreading to towns all over Washington. Making matters worse, Inslee and his party are following San Francisco's lead and are legalizing crime and lawlessness. And adding insult to injury, they are waging an all-out war on the Second Amendment. So let me see if I get this straight. They make our streets more dangerous. They tell the police that they cannot protect us. And then they take away our right to actually defend ourselves. Doesn't sound like that great a deal to me. As governor, I will block any attempt to jeopardize the Second Amendment in Washington State. Because we do not want to give violent criminals the upper hand in our communities. And here's another bad deal. Our state has one of the highest gas taxes in the nation, yet we have the worst roads in the country. And it is an absolute embarrassment. And Jay Inslee calls these embarrassments accomplishments. Democrats have been given nearly 40 years to implement their vision. But they have taken the people for granted and betrayed our trust every chance they got. They prefer ludicrous, crazy ideas rooted in far-left ideology over common sense, affordable solutions. Literally take your pick of issues where Inslee has failed us. Education, gun rights, free speech, homelessness, roads, transit, small business, and yes, the environment. They seriously want to tear down the dams so they can save a couple of fish. You can't really make this stuff up. Now, independents and many Democrats are looking around for real leadership because what they're seeing happening right now in our state is something that doesn't look quite right to them. They're looking at the Democrat Party and saying, this is not what I signed up for. Today's Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party of the past. It is now wholly controlled by the leftist ideologies and has left us a huge mess that we need to clean up. And as governor, I want to start disinfecting Olympia on day one. Yeah. But they don't just have bad ideas. Their craziness is incredibly expensive. And worse, you're expected to pay for it. As governor, I'm going to save you money. Jay Inslee, who promised voters that he wouldn't raise taxes, didn't just break his promise. No, he decided to go big on betrayal. And he has raised taxes in the last 8 years 29 times. He promised to veto any tax increase when he was running for office, but in the last 8 years, he has raised taxes 29 times. The cost of those broken promises, $50.6 billion in higher taxes. Now, Inslee really wants to take it to taxpayers to the woodshed with some crazy new taxes on everyone. And I mean everyone. He wants to tax you for every mile you drive, which is brutally unfair to the people of Yakima and everyone on the east side of the state that must have a vehicle to drive in order to be able to get to work. And yet, here is Inslee pushing this experiment despite the fact that the voters do not want it. And I would absolutely veto any pay-per-mile tax. There is no way the voters should have that. Yeah, right. Inslee's obsession with raising taxes has also got us looking down the barrel of a gun of an income tax. Income taxes the voters have rejected nearly 10 times in our near 100-year history, and yet Inslee continues to push for this pet obsession whether we like it or not. A carbon tax, something that the voters have said repeatedly we don't want. Inslee's pushing for a carbon tax that would lead to more corruption than our state has ever seen. I can't imagine anything that I would veto faster than that. And of course, if you elect me governor, one way or another, you are paying $30 for car tabs and not a penny more. You know I was getting there eventually. Get with the program. Read a newspaper. All right. I really think that car tabs are really an insidious tax because what you're dealing with is something that really, really hurts the poor. Whenever I would go out to fairs with my daughter and collecting signatures, I was struck by how many people would come up to me and say, my car tabs went through the roof, I can barely survive. And I have in my mind $300, $500, $800. And these people say, I'm paying $120 for a 1977 Chevy. And what you people forget, and what the left seems to forget, and what Inslee forgets, is that at their income level, that $120, that $150 is a tremendous burden. And they just laugh it off and saying, well, it's just one less dinner out with me and my colleagues and my lobbyists. For regular taxpayers, this is real money. And they just don't seem to have any sympathy for that average taxpayer that's really struggling. They affect everybody, including the poorest among us. And I think that it is simply unconscionable when voters that are barely making ends meet and simply want $30 tabs that Inslee, Ferguson, and Seattle fight them tooth and nail. And by the way, what was the first bill that the legislature passed this legislative session? A tax increase. They just did it last week. And what did our fine governor decide to do with that bill? He signed it. That makes 30. 30 different tax increases over 8 years. Your choice, 30 tax increases or $30 tabs. I like that choice. Yes. I've always believed that the average taxpayer is the least represented individual in our government. You see it every day down in Olympia. There are times where I'll travel down there and testify on bills where there's a bill that raises taxes, and you literally have 98 people signed in saying, yes, we're for that. And maybe me and one other person are signing in against it. Why is that? Because it's in the middle of the day of a work day, and you drive down there for 3 hours one way, 3 hours back, and you sit there for an hour or two in order to be able to talk for 2 minutes. What kind of freak of nature would actually do something like that when we're all working for a living? Apparently, I'm one of those. That's right. Thanks for your effort. Thank you. Yeah. But honestly, that is what you face in Olympia, an entire system that is stacked against regular taxpayers. And whenever I'm testifying on these bills, I say I may be one, but I represent more people that are in this room. All the people that we've got that are against this bill, they're too busy working for a living to come all the way down here in Olympia to tell you what's pretty obvious. We do not want you guys taking any more of our money. I am literally the taxpayer's best friend, and I want your best friend sitting in the governor's office looking out for you. All right. You better want that. No, as governor, not only would I move Washington in a different direction, but people will finally have a governor that's listening to them. No issue demonstrates Democrats' contempt for voters more than $30 tabs. Some people have asked me, when am I going to start talking about other issues besides $30 tabs? And I promise you that I have been and will continue to do so. But the Democrats have ruled this state, that Olympia, that government, for literally 40 years. And I simply cannot find a better example of how arrogant they are, that when you vote for a measure that is simply about a single dollar amount, $30, and they say that is asking too much of us. You're allowing the voters too much power, too much influence. We voted for it over and over and over again, and one of the reasons you bring it back is to illustrate how out of touch your government is when they say, you may have been confused by this measure. $30 tabs. It's not 29, it's not 31, it's a very basic thing. But they literally are at a point where they cannot give the voters even one victory, one little morsel, a couple of crumbs off the table. It is too much. One of my favorite supporters, we ended up having one of these hearings on one of these bills, and his name was Jackson Johnson, I think his name, from Tacoma, traveled down, spent the time, did the 2-hour drive, had 2 minutes. I walked him back to his car afterwards, and he goes, Tim, for me, it's not about the money. It's about who's making the decisions and who's in control. And it was so moving to me, because you think about that. It is not the money. It is not the fact that you're paying more than $30 and paying $80 or $100 and $150. It's the fact that they're supposed to be representing us. We've made a decision. We, the employers, have told our employees, this is what we want, you do that. And what our employees are doing is saying, no, we're not going to give you, the employer, what you want. And that arrogance, that is so galling to me, and something that just drives me crazy, that really drives me in order to be able to run for this office. And it really does boil down to my number one priority as governor. I am running for governor because politicians like Jay Inslee and Seattle Democrats don't even pretend to listen to us anymore. And if you elect me this November, you will finally have a governor who will listen to you and respect the will of the people. Amen. I have not met a single person that was confused on their vote, but there's always a possibility. Was there anybody in this room that was confused last November on $30 tabs? No. I'm going to travel the state. I'm going to see if I can find one. They think that they are just getting back at me when they try and take one of these initiatives away. And the reality is they're sticking it to you. They're sticking it to the voters of this state every time they take away something that we, the voters, vote for. Whether it's Jay Inslee, his sidekick Bob Ferguson, they forget who they work for. They think that it's we that are supposed to be serving them. And last time I checked, it's supposed to be the other way around. The good news is, when it comes right down to it, the voters really do not have a choice but to actually support new people in this effort. Democrats and Inslee are literally daring you to do something different than you've done for 40 years. And they are daring you because they think that when it comes to car tabs, when it comes to taxes, that there's literally no limit to how much they can take, and they are literally hell-bent to making sure that the government solves every problem and make sure that their party is created in that image. And he just doesn't think about what the people are actually going to do anything about it. So if they're giving you a dare, I'm giving you an out. I love this state, its people, and I think Washington ought to be the envy of the nation. But right now, we're not. Why can't Washington have the best roads, the best schools, lowest debt, the lowest poverty rate, and the highest incomes in the whole country? We should be the lowest tax state. We should be eradicating crime. We should be able to help and address homelessness, drug addiction on our streets. I believe we can do these things, but not with the leadership that we have today. The people of this state are too smart to give Jay Inslee or anyone in his party 4 more years to mess things up. Inslee's performance proves he doesn't deserve a 3rd term as governor. For over 20 years, I have fought to give voters a choice. I have fought for the voters to have a voice. While the current governor can hear you, he is not actually listening to you. And I have defended the taxpayers like no one else. And I have helped with all of our initiatives be able to save the taxpayers $43 billion, and I promise to veto any tax increase that ever comes across my desk from any legislature, regardless of which party controls it. We seem to have a Seattle legislature, a Seattle governor, a Seattle Supreme Court, and I think we ought to have at least one branch of government that's representing everybody else. So today, I ask you to support me as your next governor of the state of Washington. I ask you to join this campaign to give voters a chance to turn back from the madness and toward a brighter future. If you do, and I assure you with all my heart, I will do everything I can to make sure that Washington is the pride of our nation. So thank you very, very much.